In a previous video, I talked about the biological basis of nicotine addiction, and today we're talking about the physiological changes that comes from smoking. According to WHO, which is the World Health Organization, about 8 million people every year die from tobacco. 7 million are directly related to smoking, and 1.2 million are a result of people being exposed to secondhand smoke, which means they don't smoke, but maybe someone in their family or their friends or in their environment smokes, and then they inhale the smoke that the smokers smoke. When I talk about tobacco products, I mainly talk about cigarettes, cigars, and heated tobacco. Heated tobacco is the thing where you put tobacco inside and then you heat the thing up and then you inhale through the thing. What categorizes these three things is that you find nicotine and tar and other particles that are very bad for your health inside of these products. Apart from tobacco products, you can also get these things called ENDS. ENDS are products that mainly contain nicotine and no tar, but they're still not that much healthier. In fact, there's increasing evidence that they're just as bad for you, apart from you don't get the tar effect, but you do get all of the other bad and negative effects on your health. These ENDS could be something like cigalikes. They look like cigarettes, so when you smoke them, you inhale through something that looks like a cigarette, but it's not a cigarette, so you just get vape instead. That's the same with vape pens, tank systems, disposables, and these different types of pods, where sometimes some of them can have about 200 sucks, and then once you're done, you just throw them in the bin. And these are still not a healthier option to cigarettes, as I mentioned before. They just exclude the tar, but you do have nicotine in them. Tobacco products like cigarettes and cigars have a very specific and prominent taste. They used to be sold in Denmark and in some other countries with menthol taste because the menthol makes the rash and the harsh feeling of inhaling the smoke less. It dampens that effect. But now that it's become illegal in Denmark to sell them, you can no longer get menthol taste cigarettes. Usually people bought them because of the taste, because of the menthols, that it was easier to inhale them. But for vape pens, you can get a variety of different flavors. I'll put a little wheel up here so you can see all the different flavors. It ranges from tropical to sweet to minty. You can even get alcohol like scotch. So the variety is huge, and this appeals to many people because the taste itself isn't that nice. So getting something that makes it taste better just makes it more appealing. Plus, it's a little bit of fun. Maybe you can see it as a little bit more fun that you inhale something that smells and tastes like bubblegum rather than just straight tobacco products. Nicotine is found naturally in the tobacco plant and is used as an insecticide, which means that the tobacco grows it naturally inside of the plant to protect bugs and insects from eating the plant. Now, this is really good for the plant because it ensures its survival, but it is a poisonous substance. Now, some people extracted the nicotine and decided to use nicotine for different plants to protect those plants as well. There's lots of different favorable reasons why you would do this, because it protects the crops and protects your income over time. But putting it in a cigarette and drying it and all those things, that what causes the negative effect is the tar. It's the burning of the tobacco. Now, you would still, even if you only had nicotine products like nicotine plasters, nicotine gum, or those nicotine snuff packets where you put it under your lip or wherever else you would put it, you still get these toxic effects from nicotine. But having the nicotine and smoking it and burning it also creates the additional tar, and that creates lots of different other negative particles. So no amount of nicotine use or tobacco use is risk-free. Nicotine is a very clever substance that changes form depending on which environment it finds itself in. So if you eat nicotine. Like you take a leaf from the tobacco plant and you eat it, and it goes down through and ends in the stomach. It will mix with the stomach acid. Here, the nicotine becomes diprotonated. This makes it incredibly hard for the body to absorb the nicotine, which thankfully is good for us. If you instead smoke the nicotine, you have the tobacco plant, you dry the leaf or whatever, put it into a filter or the wrapping paper, and then you light it, it becomes unprotonated, which means that via the smoke, it is way easier absorbed in the body because it's unprotonated. So that's why inhaling it via smoke or in those snuff package here, it doesn't have that far to go into the bloodstream, which makes it more easily absorbed, and therefore the nicotine that you would have into your bloodstream is way higher if you smoke it or put it under your lip rather than eating the leaf itself. Now that you have the nicotine coming into your system, either through the smoke and then going into your blood, or the nicotine going over your mucous membrane through the lip or the mouth, you will now have it running in your bloodstream, and it can cross over the blood-brain barrier, which is the surrounding system that supplies your brain with blood and therefore oxygen. When the nicotine then goes over the blood-brain barrier, it binds to these nicotine receptors. The nicotine receptors, when they get bound to, release dopamine. This dopamine is a reward system. So the more nicotine you give, the more dopamine comes out. When you then cease smoking or stop smoking, or let's say you have a cigarette and you haven't smoked for 8 hours or so, your brain will start to tell you that, hey, I need to smoke, I need that nicotine, because when the nicotine binds to the receptor, it releases more dopamine. And when you create this artificial environment where you provide the nicotine and therefore the dopamine in the end via smoking, the brain tells you that, hey, we're getting these dopamine from different sources like the nicotine, so we won't produce as much dopamine like we used to. Therefore, when you continue to smoke, your normal dopamine level would be about here, but because you smoke so regularly, I'm over-exaggerating this, your new normal is up here. So when you then cease smoking, your dopamine levels will actually fall a bit below what is supposed to be the norm, and it is way below what you have created the norm to be. Now, this will be neutralized over many years or maybe a few months, but that's why you get this sort of addiction, because your dopamine is lower and your brain is telling you, hey, we need the dopamine. The black dots in this diagram are cigarettes that have a normal amount of nicotine in them, and the white dots, the ones with white inside them, are just cigarettes that have a lower level of nicotine. Now, what you can see when you smoke the cigarette, especially, let's pay attention to the one that's filled out with the black dot, it takes about 10 minutes to smoke a cigarette, and then you see the spike of nicotine in the blood. That's what you see out here. So the nicotine in the blood increases vastly and then goes steadily down. Alongside this diagram, I'm going to put in a diagram that contains 4 other different hormones, and I want to specifically pay attention to ACTH, epinephrine, and cortisol. ACTH, cortisol, and epinephrine are hormones that are produced in the adrenal glands. Epinephrine and cortisol are both stress hormones. Cortisol is a long-lasting stress hormone, whereas epinephrine is another form of adrenaline, which gives you this huge spike and then a decrease again. The cortisol and the epinephrine in combination will increase the sympathetic nervous system, which is also known as your fight or flight response. This makes your blood rise, it makes you more focused, it makes you more awake. It gives you all of this energy so you can quickly react to some immediate danger. It was very useful back in the old days where we would have to watch out for lions or other different dangerous animals that would come to kill us. Now, the nicotine itself has this calming and good feeling effect, so simultaneously you will feel alert, awake, focused, but you will also feel very comfortable. Now, we're not 100% sure that the nicotine rise in the bloodstream causes these rises in hormones, but they're very harmonious, so there might be some sort of combination. If you've never smoked before or taken any nicotine products or used any nicotine substances, you might feel these toxic effects. And this can occur from just having a few hits from a cigarette or maybe one of those snuff packages that you have them in for like 5 minutes or so. The sort of symptoms that you would feel are the nicotine toxic effects, which like has an effect on the sympathetic nervous system. So that would be your heart is beating, you're sweating, but you feel cold, you're dizzy, you want to throw up, and all these sorts of things. If you've smoked often, you won't feel these toxic effects as much to the same degree, but you will definitely feel them if, let's say, you smoke 10 cigarettes a day or you use 10 snuff packages a day, but then increase it to 20. So as soon as there's an increase in the norm, you will experience these toxic effects from nicotine. If you have these severe symptoms like your respiratory system is failing you and your heart is pounding real fast, you will feel this heart pounding, but it will be an abnormal amount of heart pumping, and that your heart, you will feel slight headache from the mild toxic symptoms, but your brain will start to cramp. These are very, very, very toxic symptoms that are very severe, but mostly you wouldn't get to this point because you would usually stop, because the mild toxic symptoms from nicotine are just too unbearable, so you wouldn't do it. But if you surpass that and experience these extreme symptoms, the effect could usually be death. When you cease to smoke or stop using nicotine products, your dopamine level will slowly fall down. Now, you have created this artificial higher level of dopamine in your brain, so it is used to having it this high. So the regular norm will feel lower than what you're used to, because you keep spiking the blood with nicotine, and then the nicotine binding to receptors will release dopamine. But as you get adjusted to that, you will feel these abstinence, and that will be stuff like headache, having difficult concentrating, irritability. You might feel hunger and then eat more food and maybe put on weight. But weight gain is by no means bad. It's better to cease smoking because you can reverse weight gain, rather than it is very difficult to backtrack on the effects of long-term smoking. Some people might experience trouble with sleeping, and other people might experience trouble with depression due to your dopamine level being lower than what you're normally used to. But if you see a doctor or physician or like a health counselor, they will be able to help you and provide you with the help that you need. There are different products, as in this diagram, that have different effects on the nicotine in the bloodstream. So the cigarettes give you a huge spike, but then last for a very short time, which is usually why you have to keep smoking. But for example, with the nicotine plaster, you put it on and then it has a steadily rise in nicotine in the bloodstream because it needs to cross the skin barrier. But this gives you a more steady nicotine increase, and these are the sorts of things that you can use to decrease your nicotine or tobacco use. Whilst it's not more healthy to change from cigarettes to nicotine plaster, it can be a great way to help finally stop. Because cigarettes would be the worst possible thing, then you can go down to a milder terrible thing, and then finally stop. So don't be afraid to use these products to your advantage in order to gain smoking cessation. It is not easy. It is way better when you have help or do it in groups. There's a lot more success rates for that in terms of statistics, but you usually have to go through around 6 times where you try to stop smoking to finally get there. And it is a battle throughout life, but the faster you stop, the better the effects. When we look at nicotine and tar, we usually see this linear trend that the more nicotine there is in a product, the more tar there usually is, and this goes for tobacco products. We obviously don't want the tar because it negatively impacts our health, but we also don't want the nicotine because it has a series of physiological changes. These physiological changes include like increased heart rate, reduced blood going out to the peripheral tissue. It negatively impacts our cholesterol levels, and it has an effect on an increased insulin resistance, which could partly play into a risk factor as developing type 2 diabetes. And last but not least, it can affect and increase the risk for developing cardiovascular diseases. It's important to note that whilst the nicotine might not be a contributing factor to developing cancers, it still has lots of physiological impacts on your health. In our respiratory system, especially in the bronchs and the bronchioles, we have these small cells called cilia. The function of cilia is so that when they encounter something that shouldn't be in the respiratory system, they slowly move them up through the throat. And then you get this sensation that, oh, there's something there, and you cough and you cough and you cough. You get it up in your mouth, and then you can swallow it, and it goes straight into the stomach, where it gets destroyed by the stomach acid. When you smoke, the tar goes in and irritates the cilia, and they actually destroy them. But the tar also sits on lining inside the respiratory system on the epithelial cells. Now, the less cilia you have, the further down the different substances can go before your body can cough it up again. And if you're really extreme and have smoked a lot for many years, you might not even have any cilia left, which causes this maybe permanent state of having an inflammation in the respiratory system, because you can't get the bacteria up and out and then into the stomach instead, where it can be destroyed. Apart from the tar that we're really worried about when people smoke, because it goes into the lining of the epithelial cells and the whole respiratory system, we're also worried about a thing called carbon monoxide, which is known as the silent killer. Carbon monoxide binds very well to the hemoglobin that you find in the bloodstream, and it takes the space for oxygen and carbon dioxide. This then in turn means that we have a smaller oxygen supply around the body, because the carbon monoxide is taking the space. Now, they don't stay there forever. You can get rid of them, but it's only after smoking cessation, after a long time. You can also have carbon monoxide attaching yourself to hemoglobin in your body, even if you don't smoke, but if you're being exposed to secondhand smoke. I won't go into the illnesses that you can be at risk of developing when smoking, since I'm sure there's lots of other articles about that, especially on WHO's website. But what I will go into is the importance of early smoking cessation, as you can decrease the rate in which you develop a disability or even death from smoking. As you see here, there's a curve below, and you can have, when you haven't smoked, the lung capacity decreases slightly over time with age, and that is a very normal thing. But you can see that when you stop smoking at the age of 45, you actually increase the time that it takes for you to get to the disability line. Obviously, we don't want to get there, but that is a good thing. Whereas if you stop smoking at 65, you're in the disability range, but you increase your life years as such. You just prolong the time until you eventually die. So that the earlier you stop smoking, the longer you will live, both in quantity but also quality. There are many benefits to stopping smoking. Most of them are long-term, but there are also a few very acute benefits to stopping. After 20 minutes, your blood pressure and your heart rate will slowly decrease and become closer to the norm. Your blood circulation will also improve. After 8 hours, the amount of carbon monoxide in your body will decrease, which in turn will make more space for carbon dioxide and oxygen, and thereby your fitness level will increase. After 24 hours, the acute risk of developing cardiovascular diseases and lung infections will disappear, and after 48 hours, all the carbon monoxide will now be gone from your body. After 2 to 3 days, you will have less slime in your throat, and it will be easier to breathe. Now, the third day from smoking cessation will usually be the hardest one, as the abstinences will be really high, but 3 days is great. After 5 to 7 days, you will have a better sense of taste and smell, and you will also have cleaner teeth and a fresher breath. After 2 to 3 weeks, your risk of developing a heart attack will decrease, you will have less thoughts about smoking, and the nicotine abstinences will usually be gone. That doesn't mean that you're still not addicted, because you can be socially addicted to something, like because it's a habit or because you're used to in this social situation. You usually take a cigarette, like if you're at a party or when you wake up and you feel that coffee mug against your hand, you usually have a cigarette. So that can be a habit. So social context and habits and different behavioral addictions isn't gone, but the nicotine itself is gone. After 4 weeks, your sinuses will be less clogged and you won't experience all of this breathlessness. You will feel less tired and you will have more energy, as well as your respiratory system being able to fight off infections better. After 2 to 3 months, your lung capacity will be increased by 5%, and after a year, your risk of developing cardiovascular diseases will be halved. After 2 to 3 years, your risk of developing lung infections and influenza will be as low as that of non-smokers. After 5 years, your risk of developing cardiovascular diseases will be just as or almost the same as people who never smoked. After 5 to 10 years, the risk of developing heart attacks will be almost the same as people who never smoked, and after 10 years, the risk of developing lung cancer will be halved. Osteoporosis and the development of that will also slowly decrease, but this only happens after 10 years. By having said all that, I think that the sooner you stop smoking, the better, because then your body has longer time to recover from this, especially as some of them only happen after 10 years, but you do have these acute effects and benefits from like smoking cessation. There are things that can trouble you, like weight gain. We see that a lot in women, but the effects of weight gain can be reversed, as well as it might not be that severe in most cases, whereas the effects with smoking take way longer to reverse, and in some cases it might not even be reversible. But this video was just to highlight the physiological changes and how long it takes for the body to recover again from all of that. It was more as a way to enlighten you guys and let you know about the latest knowledge. It's not as much to say that you have to stop smoking. If you don't want to, that's obviously your choice, but the evidence points in a specific direction, and I just wanted to let you know where the evidence stands. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything that you want to know about in depth or have questions about, let me know. I love you. See you later.